Hey everybody, what's going on? Fabian for Liberty, FabianForLiberty.com. My name is Fabian Calvo. So a lot of cheerful news I'm going to cover today. Certainly not wearing any rose-colored glasses. So if you don't like, if you'd rather hear about the NCAA or NAACP lady that's actually white that was masquerading as being black, and now they're talking about giving her a new reality TV show. If that's the news that you'd rather be tuned into and plugged into, certainly I'll save you about 8 or 9 minutes of your time, and you might as well stop watching now. Because today I'm going to talk about a couple of economic things, and I also want to talk about something that's just not getting any airtime whatsoever in the mainstream media. The general masses completely clueless about the war propaganda machines working overtime in what could potentially be a nuclear war scenario with the Russians. Now, I know that sounds bold. I know it sounds like hyperbole. And let me just say that I think I'm one of the few people out there that post these videos that actually preface them with saying, I hope I'm wrong about all this stuff. Okay? I've said many times, I got 2 small kids. I want them to grow up in the world of peace and prosperity. I don't want them to grow up in a nuclear winter, I think it's called. I don't want them to grow up in that type of environment, just saying. And I would probably suspect you don't either. First, let's jump into some economic news. Real quick, at the end of this video, I'm going to be talking about the webinar I'm doing on Friday for this trip that I'm planning to Colombia. I'm going to be taking 7 people with me, and I'll get into that towards the end of the video. But here we go. Okay, so Greece, the Greek banks are warning of a major crisis on hand as the potential for Greece to leave the euro draws ever closer. That may happen. I don't think that will happen. I could be totally wrong. I've been wrong before, but I don't think Greece ends up leaving the euro for various reasons that I've talked about both on my podcast and these videos. But it's interesting, since Monday, actually Sunday, they came out with the announcement that there wasn't any deal yet with the creditors. And then Monday, you had Greeks pull out $450 million out of the banking system in Greece. And supposedly most people are, according to the London Guardian, are storing tens of thousands of dollars in cash under their mattress, which is kind of happening here to a certain extent. But again, what we've seen in Greece is a complete breakdown of trust in the financial markets there. And so people panic. Now, we're going to see the same thing here in America. Yesterday, I read an interesting article where this top investment company came out, hedge fund, private equity company, came out with a paper about how the Fed should not be concerned about the ghost of 1937. And what they mean is that during the Great Depression, the Federal Reserve back then, they claim raised interest rates too fast, which prolonged the Great Depression. I would disagree with that. I think raising interest rates actually helps a real economy grow. What happened back then, though, is that you had FDR with the New Deal and all these just government alphabet soup programs that were being invented and created that completely distorted the market. And that's what's happened with our free markets here in America, really since, for the last 20, 30 years, but really since 2000, when we've gone from $4 trillion in debt to $18 trillion in debt. It's been a complete and utter disaster, and free markets have been completely abandoned to this Keynesian central planning dystopia, which is what we have today. Other geopolitical news on this front, and I think that the news that I'm talking today directly links to the economy. I've told you all along, this always goes back to the economy. The rest of the world, particularly the Russians and the Chinese, and Iran, recognize America is weak right now. And it's weak because its economy is on the brink. Doesn't mean it doesn't have the strongest military still yet. However, in a collapsed economy, or an economy that is suffering significantly, how can you continue to justify to the American people more war, more military spending? So the two just don't combine. The rest of the world knows this, particularly this Eastern superbloc that is being formed. That's why you have China building this new island, basically, this new military island in the middle, 600 miles off of the coast of mainland China. It's why you have the Chinese simulating invading Taiwan as well, because truth is that they could get away with any of this. The U.S. isn't going to stop them, just like I told you the U.S. wasn't willing to send in troops, at least last November, to stop the Russians from, in essence, taking over Crimea. I mean, Putin, I've said this all along, could have rolled in in the first tank with the big goggles on, straight to Kiev, and nobody would have stopped him. Now, brings me to a great article that was written, I'll post the article down below, that was written for Zero Hedge by one of the writers from antiwar.com. Antiwar.com is a wonderful website that I highly recommend for all of you that are looking to create a more peaceful world. But it talked about, actually, most recently, Western media has been talking about how the Russians are drilling nuclear drills, how Putin is this year going to have 40 new IBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, all nuclear grade or capable of basically delivering a nuclear payload, how they're talking about ramping this up in light of the U.S. moving over 5,000 pieces of heavy weaponry into Eastern Europe and all the troops that are going to come along with managing that weaponry as well. But here's the most concerning, and this shows you that there's really no detachment from the insane policymakers at the central banks around the world, particularly the Western central banks, and specifically the Federal Reserve. They're completely nuts, but the people that are running the military are even more scary. And this was Under Secretary of State Robert Scheer. Yeah, just a few weeks ago, he floated the idea before Congress that maybe it might not be a bad idea that the U.S. actually does a first nuclear strike in Russia. I'm not making this up. This is so incredibly insane. So just think about that. You're the Russians. You hear the Undersecretary of State. Actually, I think he's the Undersecretary of the Department of Defense, coming out and saying nuclear first strike against the Russians. Not to mention the fact that he's talking about putting, the West is also talking, the U.S. is also talking about putting nuclear weapons in Eastern Europe to stop Russian aggression, what they claim to be Russian aggression. When the truth is, ladies and gentlemen, look, I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm not for the Russians. I get accused all the time of somehow being a spokesperson for the Russians or for Putin or whatever. When I looked at acts of aggressions around the world, the biggest act of aggression, ladies and gentlemen, is what the Western central banks are doing to the working class and the middle class, not only in America, but around the world. The distortion of the free markets that they've caused under this banner of liberalism or, spreading the wealth around, which has gotten us to where we are at today, okay? An economy that the Fed cannot raise interest rates because it'll collapse the economy. But yet if they do raise interest rates too quickly, it'll completely panic the market, even though that's the right thing to do, is raise interest rates. That's why you had Volcker raise interest rates in the early 80s, and it stopped the massive inflation that was created under Jimmy Carter. But again, no one seems to really care about history or about real sound monetary policy, it seems like, anymore. All right, last quick thing I want to just mention is end of September, beginning of October. I'm still squaring away the dates. I'm going to be taking 7 people with me to Colombia. Now, I've looked, as you know, at places all around the world. This is going to be our first trip, but there's places in Ecuador, Central America, South America, and Asia that I love that have big expatriate communities that are thriving and growing. I think last week I posted on my Facebook channel a record number of Americans in 2015 have renounced their citizenship, their U.S. citizenship. And when they say record numbers, you think, it's millions. It's only, I think it's under 2,000 people, but the trend is growing. And there's many others that are leaving that keep their American citizenship because they likely have family here, but they're getting the hell out of here and living a much better lifestyle in these countries because their currency goes a long way. So I've looked at all these places. A good friend of mine and business partner of mine is from Colombia. He's actually moving back to Colombia. And him and I have planned a trip, like I said, end of September, beginning of October. We're going to take 7 people to specifically look at farmland and other property investment opportunities, to look at the ability to obtain citizenship over there and the ability to also be able to open up your own bank account or whatever. We're going to have all these professionals speak to the group. It's going to be a real fun time. And it also is going to allow the individuals that go on the trip to begin to scout and look at other areas that they could potentially plant international flags and who knows, maybe move to eventually. Now, Colombia, it's interesting. I'd say people mostly 40 and over, when you talk to them about even 30, or, I mean, these are people that actually have somewhat of a room temperature IQ. I'm not talking about the dumbed down masses that, all they care about is Caitlyn Jenner. What I'm talking about is people that kind of, have an idea about things. Many of them still think South America, Central America is a third world hellhole. And to a certain extent, they're right. But I mean, there's places in America that I could take you to throughout the South, or even in parts of California, that are third world hellholes. I mean, it's bad. The point is that because these countries are so inexpensive, a lot of them have done everything they can to lure in multinational companies, all kinds of other investments. In Colombia is one of them. In fact, they're one of the top that are, many are calling Medellin one of the new Silicon Valleys of the world, because all these startups are moving there because it's easy to start a business, easy to run a business, government isn't involved in your day-to-day affairs. Now, are parts of Colombia dangerous? Yeah, if you go up to the border with Venezuela, in the jungles, you're probably going to get kidnapped by FARC rebels, FARC Marxist rebels. But that's not where we're going to be going. We're actually going to be staying in places that are very safe. In fact, some of these places much safer than Philadelphia, Detroit, some of these other bigger cities in the United States. But again, if that's something that interests you, just click the link down below. We're having a webinar about it this Friday. Super excited about it. It's the first time we've done this. And we're looking to plan actually others throughout next year as well. So again, I'm Fabian Calvo, Fabian for Liberty, my website, fabianforliberty.com. The anti-war article that I talked about is down below, as well as the link to register to our trip that we'll be taking to Colombia later on this year. Thanks for watching. I'm out.